Hey everybody, welcome to another Rackspace Office Hours Hangout. My name is Alan Bush and we are broadcasting live from the castle, Rackspace's headquarters here in San Antonio, Texas. I'm here with our co-host,
Drew Cox.
and we've got a really good show today. We've got in three guests, and so it's going to be a big fun panel today. Let's go ahead and get everybody introduced here. Andrew, we'll start with you. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Andrew Odewahn. I'm the CTO of O'Reilly Media, and I'm not in a castle. I'm just in Concord, Massachusetts. So,
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
sure.
Really appreciate it. A little time to talk to us here. Sorry about that, Drew. I muted over you there. But yeah, it's great to have you here, and we're really interested to see how you guys are using specifically our Carina containers over there at O'Reilly. Jason, let's introduce you as well. Thanks for joining us today, Jason.
Yeah, Alan, Drew, thanks for having me on again. My name is Jason Barnhill. I'm a product marketing manager here at Rackspace. I am in Austin, Texas, and one of the products that I help support is our Carina containers offering. So really excited to join you guys again. We had a good show a couple weeks ago, and looking forward to learning a little bit more from Andrew how O'Reilly is using it and have some good discussion.
Definitely, Jason. And you were on a couple of weeks ago when we kind of introduced this. You were one of the ones that were here while everybody else was in Tokyo. So those of us that didn't get to go kind of held down the fort and introduced everything. So glad to have you back on. And then another repeat guest is Kyle Kelley. Kyle, thanks for joining us again.
Hey everybody. So I'm a developer on Carina, but also part of the developer.rackspace.com group. I'm working on client tools and all sorts of stuff, and then I also work on the Jupyter Project, which does some of the technology that Andrew's using as part of O'Reilly Media.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us. So real quick, just to kind of get us started here, we're going to be talking about the Carina Docker as a Service product that we just launched, about 3-4 weeks ago. And O'Reilly was one of the earlier users of that, kind of jumped in on the pre-release beta there, and have done some really great things with that. And Kyle, you've done some neat things with it as well. So really excited to hear about that. Andrew, why don't you tell us just a little bit about O'Reilly, if anybody's not familiar, and with O'Reilly, the books, and then everything else beyond that you all are doing.
Sure. So we're probably best known among developers for the books with animals on the cover. And I always like to start by saying, we're not Bill O'Reilly, we're Tim O'Reilly. So, we have the books with the animals, but we also do conferences. So we do Strata, which is a big data conference, Velocity, which is web performance, and our OSCon, which is our open source conference, which is going to be in Austin this year for the first time. So we're excited to be coming to Texas for that. And we also have a number of online sites. We have Safari, which is an online book, basically a kind of a Spotify library for books, and books, videos. I mean, you name it. There's all sorts of content in that. And my role at O'Reilly is really looking in sort of two dimensions. The first is just how do we produce all the media content that we have. So if you've bought an O'Reilly book or an ebook, it's most likely been produced by the tools that I kind of manage. And that's both the how we do make them, and also what do authors use to actually create stuff. And that product is called Atlas internally, and it's basically a Git-backed version control system where you can check lots of different content in and generate books and EPUBs and PDFs and all sorts of stuff. But the other more interesting aspect, or the thing that I'm really more passionate about, is how do we not just produce books and text, but how do we create new kinds of media? And that's things like how do we give people live environments where instead of reading a book about about Python, they're actually using Python, or just instead of like, here's a video about support vector machines, you've got a machine that's configured to use it, and you're able to do, you're able to use it right there and have a great experience with it. So that's kind of broadly the role that I play, and I have a small team in Brooklyn of about 5 developers, and then a team in Boston where we mostly do all the book production work and the content production.
Great. Yeah, it's definitely one thing to read a book, but it's a whole other thing to jump in and do something, and actually
Yeah.
get your hands dirty on that. So as I understand it, that's what you and Kyle have kind of been working together on. Kyle, can you tell us a little bit about how you have used Jupyter and done some really interesting things where you can actually each individual user can execute code and practice and learn new things.
Yeah, so background on the Jupyter project, it's a project targets interactive computing and reproducibility. Um, and so scientists, data scientists, engineers, analysts, they end up using this tool to work in Python to explore their data and try to explore whatever data set they have, whatever API calls they're making, or just generally learn about programming in Python. And it gives them a fast way with a lot more information than the default REPL, the read eval print loop, than you get from just running standard Python at the command line. And as part of this, in creating all this tooling, it's basically a remote way to inject code into some running namespace and get results back, right? And if we do that same kind of setup that people get from the IPython console or from the Jupyter Notebook, but we extend it into, can we launch this code inside of a Docker container, and give someone a fresh Docker container and then tear it down when they're done, then we have this ephemeral environment to run code in, explore, and send results back to the user, right? And then creating the entire environment, which may have tons of different dependencies. They may need, like Andrew was saying, we need support vector machines, so it might be pulling from scikit-learn or some other big scientific Python stack, right? The user doesn't want to have to install that. We should get them to the point of learning right away. And so create a Docker container, has everything that they need, launch that for them, let them run code.
So there's definitely a time to market conversation that happens a lot around cloud and a lot of these different tools. And this isn't necessarily a time to market type of a question, but it is definitely a time to first touch, being able to actually get your hands dirty very quickly. So I think that's a really compelling way to educate. And down the road, that does become a time to market conversation when you're able to verify and prove a direction or a thought process can actually achieve your goal. Then you can pivot that very quickly into something that's more valuable to a broader audience. So that's kind of what I'm seeing. What other values are you seeing people get out of beginning to think in this way?
Yeah, well, I think time to market is spot on, certainly for us, because we support such a broad range of different applications. So it's not just Python, but we have, I was on a call earlier about Java. We have people doing Scala. We have people doing Ruby. There's this whole spectrum of tools and technologies that people are using that we want to write about, that we want to give authors a platform to be able to reach people with. And what the advantage of Docker and Jupyter together gives us is really a uniform way to kind of package up a lot of those offerings, so that we're not trying to reinvent, understand the packaging system for Erlang before we can release, a 50-page book about it. We can just spin up a Docker container that's got everything on. So I think time to market is certainly spot on. Another really big advantage is being able to support that diversity, like I mentioned, but also expand the range of kinds of products. And certainly for us as a media company, we've done really well with books. We've done really well with live events and the conferences. But as I look at the way people are learning and the way developers learn, and even for myself, and I'm trying to teach, my kids are interested in programming, and I'm looking at what are the resources I'm going to give them. It's the kind of online interactive tutorials where you're using something, you're directly just jumping on and starting to use something. You're not spending the first hour, 45 minutes trying to figure out, how do I get these dependencies installed on my machine? It's boom, and you're using it. And that's really the experience that we want to give people with our products. Is if you're learning about Spark, you come right in and you learn about Spark. You don't learn about like the whole, how do I package a Java app, and how do I get Scala running. I've kind of put it as I'd like to installation instructions to be the last chapter, not the first. And you really get that great experience. You see why people are excited about a tool, and you give people that taste of what it can do just right out of the box. And so that's that first 5-10 minutes that you have to get somebody's attention on a tool. I think is like that's the golden few minutes that you have to reach them, and that's where I see a lot of the advantage of Jupyter and Docker.
There's a transactional friction component that I think a lot of people in IT, but people who are interacting with technology really sense, and that's when you go to a website and it loads slow or something along those lines. There's the friction that it takes to actually get something done, and there's not a whole lot of patience with that friction. We'd rather be in it and going, and like you mentioned, a lot of times there is a pretty long build-up, or at least long enough to lose momentum on getting started. And so that, I think you've identified the same thing that, at least at this time of the year, we're hearing a lot of people in the e-commerce world talking about. You got to have fast page load times, and if the checkout process takes too long, people are going to bail, and you won't be able to close business. Well, that reality still rings true with your sets of goals, trying to educate and getting people up and running with these new technologies. But as long as you can minimize that transactional friction, the odds of someone getting set and getting comfortable and starting to learn quickly and actually taking that learning process further seems like it would go up pretty substantially. Is that something you've seen corroborated, or is that a hunch you're still working on verifying?
No, definitely. I mean, that's and it's not just the pure time of on my page, in 5 seconds I've got a container and the environment set up. I think there's also just the mental tax of trying to work and learn a new subject, but then also to have this sort of operational overhead that you need. So I was working with some astronomers to help them set up a Python environment for teaching radio astronomy. And it's like, that's already hard enough. It's like they don't need to also figure out, what version of pip do they need, and how do they use conda, and these dependencies have all these different sorts of things. So I think by being able to use something like Docker and a nice packaging environment like like Docker, and being able to put things on Docker and give people these environments really quickly, you're just taking away this whole mental tax of the operations side, and you're putting that either on the author, because the author has gets really frustrated when the people complain in reviews and things about their books because I got this book and it didn't work, or I give it and it didn't work, but it was because someone had the wrong version of a library, or they were using something that was 2 versions behind. It wasn't incompatible. So you can kind of freeze the environment that people are working on and give that exactly the context, and it just makes it easier, I think, for everybody.
Well, that's great. That's kind of, that's really what we were looking at as we set up Carina and this containers as a service. Jason, could you talk a little bit about that? This is kind of echoing what we talked about a few weeks ago, but it really seems like this is validating what we were looking at there before.
Yeah, absolutely. Alan, as you noted a couple weeks ago, Simon, Ukesh, and I were on talking about Carina just after the announcement. So we've been in a public beta for almost a month, about three and a half weeks here. Really pleased with the results and early signs of demand so far. And what we set out to do with Carina was, try to accomplish a lot of the things that Andrew just touched on, right? So make it simple, make it easy for users to be able to deploy and run container-based applications. And we do that by abstracting away all the infrastructure underneath it. So, to Andrew's point, if you're trying to teach a course on rocket science, right, the last thing you want to do is figure out, which versions of your dependencies do you need, and how do I set up and scale this Docker environment. We do all that for you, so you can focus on exactly what you as a user or customer want to do and what you want to do to best serve your customers. So it's great to kind of get that real world feedback from Andrew, that a lot of the things we set out to do with Carina are actually useful to some of our customers. So that's great to hear.
Well, and I think removing that operational tax has been something that that Rackspace has been about generally. I mean, we have sysads that can take care of a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to just the maintenance of an environment, be that dedicated or cloud, be that private or public. Any of those components, there's work that's required that doesn't feel value add towards customer's end goal. And anything that we can do to allow that end goal to be met more successfully with less time expended on things that we can take off your plate, I think that's been a thread that's tied a lot of our offerings together, and it makes a lot of sense that Carina would be in that same vein and from that same foundation and kind of missional direction that Rackspace has come to it from. So it makes all the sense in the world that that would be a product born out of that same kind of drive to obscure all that stuff and allow customers to get straight to business on what it is their functional goals are.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you'll see as we evolve the offering, over the course of the next year or so, is we want to continue to learn from our experience on Carina, gain that operational expertise, and scale it into the private cloud, right? So we want to be able to provide even more service and support, which, as you mentioned, Drew, really fits nicely with kind of our core competency and expertise as a company, and providing that fanatical support. And we've got a vision to bring that to containers as a service one day.
So Kyle and Andrew as well, I'm kind of curious to see. I'm not sure exactly in the timeline where Carina hit, but did this change the way that you have been putting up these at first IPython and now Jupyter notebooks? Did that change kind of the workflow that you were using there?
Well, I'll start and then let Kyle jump in. No. And that what I think is so incredibly powerful about Carina is it was just done exactly right. I think with using Docker and using the things that that Swarm provided a really thin layer on top. I know it's kind of like the tip of the iceberg. I mean, I know there's a bunch of stuff that's happening underneath with the infrastructure and maintaining it and running it. But to me, it was almost transparent in being able to kind of shift some of the things that we were doing. And I think that's really, that's kind of the promise of Docker in some ways, is when you're a single user, when you're trying to be, have a multi-host environment or a multi-container environment, it gets a lot more complicated, and that's kind of the stuff that they don't tell you about when you're doing it. And to be able to just abstract all that away under a service like Carina and not have to install all these things and worry about what versions you're on and keeping everything up to date. I mean, it's an amazingly powerful tool, and I think from the developer perspective, it's just really great. You just get these credentials, you download them, and you're off to the races. And it's just been a fantastic. Every aspect of it has just been really great.
You mentioned a couple of things already, but I'd like to take the step back and kind of hear you share what problem you are solving when you moved to containers generally, and then what additional problem you solved or value you gained from that shift to Carina. So I know we've mentioned bits and pieces and alluded to some of those, but I'd kind of like to hear that timeline narrative of the pain that you experienced, what you're able to get by taking a technology shift, and then the platform shift.
Sure. Great. Well, why don't I'll start at the very beginning, and then let Kyle talk a little bit about some of the specific problems we faced. But about a year and a half ago, we had this idea of wanting to teach a math class at Strata, and it would allow people to be able to really learn linear algebra and the kinds of things that you need to understand data science at a deeper level, but not as a PhD, but more as a user of those tools. And the idea of this session was, well, you could just go in and you could sit down and get a Docker environment. Everyone would go to this web page, and they would get their containers and get their Jupyter Notebook environment and follow along with the tutorial with a guy that was by a guy named Paco Nathan. And it was a great initial experience for maybe 15 or 20 seconds. And then suddenly it's like the reality of actually running all these containers and trying to manage all this stuff sort of sunk in. And Kyle very heroically had sat down and volunteered to kind of come to this session, which was a little bit of a kind of a leap of faith here, and that's where we ever got to know each other. But Kyle, do you want to kind of talk a little bit about what you had to do, how you fixed it, and then kind of where we learned after that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this was actually kind of the precursor. This is the original setup of that like temporary ephemeral environment thing. And if we talk about like the problem to solve, the problem in that case is you have a whole bunch of students. You all want them to have the same environment to work in. And if you tried to do that with traditional VMs, you could of course pre-spawn them and have a bunch ready. But it would cost a lot more than if you just had individual containers for them. As well as pinning down the resources and getting everything crafted together is not as easy as it is with just setting up a Docker image. And so that was like the big component there. And us in like creating this, trying to figure it out, we ended up finding a lot of parts where our infrastructure wasn't scalable. Not infrastructure as in Rackspace, infrastructure as in Jupyter. Like how are we setting up our proxy? How do we lay these out? Where do the notebooks, give out assets for the users? And so we had to figure out exactly where we had way too many file descriptors. And it was really just about, trying to whittle down to what are the right bits? How do we make this easier? How do we make this simpler? How do we make this easier for ourselves, operations-wise? And that was the key there back then. But really, I would say that the stuff that we're doing right now is nearly impossible if we try to do it with VMs versus trying to do it with containers. Because we have a system now that if we're not pre-spawning, creating a pool of these ready to go, it only takes us about 5 seconds to launch an image that, in most cases, if you were to launch a VM and install the software and everything else, it could take up to 45 minutes. And yeah, 5 seconds for 45 minutes. 5 seconds is close to like on-demand, real-time, here you go. And now we're down to 0 seconds. So, like, it's really about possibilities.
Yeah.
Well, it is. And what are some of those other possibilities that being able to spawn these instant images from containers? Like, what are some of the possibilities that have happened, and what do you see after that, and what do you see down the road? If you can kind of peek in there.
I mean, I think the most important part is that other people can build the images. I don't need to have some custom setup for it. I mean, people can upload them to Docker Hub. They can run their own registry. But generally speaking, there's a common accepted format that people are using and can share and collaborate on, right? And so it's up to those developers. It's up to those users, and there's one big community there. Cohesion, outside and throughout all markets. So.
Yeah, and just to echo that point, I mean, I think it really lowers the barrier for people to be able to take advantage of this technology who aren't technologists. So I'm thinking, people who are biologists, for example, who want to do work on genome sequencing and things. I mean, they don't need to understand the intricacies of package management. They need to be able to run their models and work on their tools, and this is a really easy way to have someone who is an expert at packaging just set everything up and give it to them, provide them access to the data that they need, and then they're able to just be able to to use those tools with the minimum of friction. And the same thing goes with if you're a data science team and you want to distribute your analysis and let people play with the models and the results and kind of tweak them. And I'm an MBA, so I feel fine to say this. You want to give it to the business users of the world. They're able to just get it and use it and be fine with it. And it's not the kind of it can really be a nightmare, I think, for a new user to come in and try to get everything set up on their machine. I mean, everyone's had that experience of going to a tutorial, and the first 45 minutes is just trying to get things installed and working on a multitude of environments. And I think this just gets rid of that. And as Kyle said, it lets the authors, it lets a creator package everything up the way that it ought to be run.
No, that's great. That's one of the things that working with some of our newer customers I've seen before, right? So we've had scientists who are trying to crunch data, trying to put in their findings into a larger project, and one of the things they needed to do was set up the environment. And if they are, one version of the OS off, one version of the underlying applications off, it just doesn't work. And so being able to remove that even the thought of having to worry about operations, being able to remove that is very helpful, I think. So I'm very excited for what this is going to mean for the scientific communities that are using this. Like you mentioned, the business people that are doing that. I mean, there's so many different applications that you can find that are, once you take away that friction that Drew was talking about earlier, it just allows people to get down to whatever they're trying to do and then doing it. So I'm very excited to see where we go with this. Even further down the road.
Well, we have a internet age now where you can Google and get almost any information you want. So the wisdom of the ages is at your fingertips. But if it's in a document form that you have to replicate on your disparate system, it doesn't feel like that wisdom is all that useful. But when you put someone else's deep expertise and lessons learned at the click button ready, then the value you're able to get is much quicker. And it feels like that wisdom that's out there becomes more attainable, and you get to switch into the thing that you're specifically talented in and that you can specifically bring to the world. And so just because you could follow a series of steps and hope that you came out with the same result that was proposed to you at the beginning didn't always pan out that way. And so it's really cool to see the progressive steps that technology is taking to put that deep expertise that maybe only a handful of people have at the disposal of a much broader audience and applied to a much broader set of problems. It's a multiplier on that expertise because it gets so many people so much further down the road so much more quickly, and the things they're able to achieve then get to the rest of us that much more quickly as well. So just the foot's down on the accelerator, and we continue to see new tools built around that same idea. But Docker has really, containers generally have really been able to take a finite set of skills and resources and make that expertise readily available without you having to, bookmark their time and have them give you the tutorial when they have a moment, and then maybe have to bookmark that again, and I'll come back because I've got all these other requirements. It can be done properly well and made available, and in the open source world, that's huge.
Absolutely is, absolutely. Well, hey, just wanted to kind of reset for anybody that might have just joined us. This is the Rackspace Office Hours Hangout. We are broadcasting live with a great panel. We've got Andrew, Kyle, and Jason joining us, and we're talking about containers, specifically the Carina containers project that allows you to spin up Docker swarms very, very quickly. And we talked a little bit about how Andrew, with a little help from Kyle, have been setting up some really interesting projects where people can go in and execute code directly from a tutorial on O'Reilly. And I think the big thing that you mentioned is the setup instructions should be the last thing, right? If you want to learn something, just get in and learn it, and don't worry about setting it up. So really excited about that as well. Excuse me. So real quick, we've been talking a little bit about Carina. I don't think we've exactly mentioned what it is. Jason and Kyle, can you guys tell us just a little bit more about Carina for people that might not have had a chance to see it yet?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. All right, so Carina is basically a Docker Swarm service on demand. You click within the UI, and you can get access to go ahead and create a cluster. You can sign up easily at getcarina.com. Just put in an email address, do some verification, do SMS verification, and then boom, account. Launch a cluster, and then get credentials for Docker. And then we provide instructions for how to source that, and then you just use native Docker tooling. There's no magic container service sauce. It's straight to Docker. So anything else you would normally use in Docker, just use it. And And then you don't just have to use the UI. We also have a Carina client, command line client that you can use in Windows, Linux, and OS X. And you download that client. You can find that off of getcarina.com. And then you can list out the clusters that you have available, create new ones, rebuild them, whatever you need to do. And really that's it. Like we're not providing any crazy things on top of that. It's just Docker. So you just use it. You get an IP address, run stuff.
That's great, Kyle. And I would add to that I think the points that Kyle highlighted really are some of the highlights, right? We wanted to make it simple. We wanted to make it easy for users to get in, create clusters, and get going with containers right away. We wanted them to be able to use the tool sets that they're familiar with, right? That's why we didn't build any, I think as Kyle put it, secret sauce, right? It's just Docker. So we wanted to make it easy for users to get in there and run and deploy their container-based applications as quickly as possible.
I mean, I guess there is one thing that I probably should say. So it's not really secret sauce so much as the hosts are locked down themselves. So you can't run privilege. There's a lot of pieces where you need to secure a host yourself, and either that would mean you'd have to deploy a host, secure Docker, and then run stuff on top of it. So we just go ahead and do that for you, and then you can just run stuff, right?
We just did it for you, so you're good to go. So just do what you want to do on it and get started. We have a video of Adrian Otto, one of the people who's very instrumental in getting this set up. His 10-year-old son, he's kind of walking him through the process, and it's very easy to do. I don't know that every 10-year-old son can do it, but definitely plenty of evidence that Adrian's was able to. But it's super easy to go and just get things started up. So I think we hit all of that. And right now, it's our public beta is for the low price of free right now. So that is a price tag that you can't beat. So definitely give it a try at getcarina.com, right? GetCarina.com and go out there and give it a try. So, yep. Andrew, I saw you looking like you had a couple of things to say there, so let's get back to you. And
I was just going to say that Jackson was my son's hero from Tokyo. I came back and I was like, hey, look, this kid set up this Docker thing. He was like, can it run Minecraft? And I said, well, I bet it can.
I bet it can too. Yeah.
That was his next question. But no, definitely. I mean, I would just echo, as a user who has been working with Docker for a while prior to Carina. I mentioned the workflows that we had didn't change, but all the things that Kyle was talking about it being locked down, about knowing that people aren't going to escape out of their container and run rampant on your system. Those are the kinds of things that if you're a technology company, you might not worry about, but as a media company, we just want to outsource that kind of stuff to the experts and have that run kind of as a seamless thing, and that's been a huge piece. And then I think the other thing that Jason mentioned is that kind of ability to move on premise with it too for things, so that it's not necessarily just in the cloud. It's also things that we would do internally, because of course, I mean, I'd be remiss to also not mention the many operational benefits that you get just from container technology, just aside from the kinds of stuff that we've been doing with learning environments. The project that I manage, Atlas, that I mentioned at the outset, we're starting to look at how do we containerize those, that process. How do we take a bunch of we're using Chef to do configuration management, and that's an amazingly powerful tool, but it's it can be really unwieldy. How do we just break things up into these small Docker containers and run things that way? I mean, there's just a lot of benefits to containerization, and then the operating of those containers. I think when you can just say, oh, I'm just gonna 45 seconds have a swarm up where I can deploy my application. I give it my compose file, and boom, I'm off. I think it's just a really super powerful combination.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. Sorry, Drew. Go ahead.
Yeah. No. I've got a follow-up question for what we were just talking about, but sounds like
I was just going to echo the points that Andrew made, right? That We really believe that while containers are at the forefront of a multi-tenant public cloud type of environment now, the future is really around private cloud and being able to enable businesses like O'Reilly and others to be very nimble and agile in terms of being great at time to market, speed to market, and also some of the cost and operational parameters that Andrew touched on, right? The ability to potentially consolidate some of the hardware requirements and save money there on top of the business agility that we believe containers will enable. So teams working hard to bring those types of capabilities to market.
Well, very cool. Andrew, the question I had was, what lessons learned that you ran across in the process of adopting containers for Project A are you now applying to that project that's currently run on Chef and maybe potential other projects down the road? Did you stub your toe on a certain thing that you've now identified and are going to be able to miss next time that you can share with a broader audience?
Yeah, I mean, I think starting with something that's really tangible and specific, not say, oh, I'm going to redo my entire infrastructure with Docker. It's like, okay, no, I'm going to take this, this Ruby, this Chef thing that was breaking because Burke Shelf updated or what, like there's a million little things that can happen, and just saying, well, here's a really tangible problem. I'm going to bite off a specific point, and I'm going to use Docker. I'm going to use container technology to solve that specific thing, and not trying to do it all at once. I think has been a big piece. The other is really, I think, making it part of a workflow is another aspect. It can't just be this container off in isolation. I mean, there's a lot of change management. There's just a lot of thinking that you have to do. That this is a piece of your technology stack. It's not the end-all be-all replacement for everything. So there's a role for ops and there's a role for development, and it gives a really nice way for those teams to communicate, because that was where I think again, if you're a multi-billion-dollar technology company, you don't have the issues I think that maybe like a media company would have, where we have patchworks of systems from all sorts of different eras and ages, and so a lot of the dependencies that one system had weren't documented. The processes were things that somebody knew and maybe had written down in a book somewhere. It's nice that containers give you a great way to document the environment so that you can hand it off to the ops people, and they can go through all that kind of the stuff to harden it and make sure your security is correct and that you're doing all the right sort of stuff and complying with the kind of broad policies, but at the same time not having to have ops be a gatekeeper. And I think that's one of the things that really frustrates, it used to frustrate me when I was a developer was, oh gosh, all I want to do is install this package, and it's like, it's going to be, 4 hours because it's a different time zone and somebody's out to lunch, so I have to wait only because this person has permission to type apt-get and I don't, and containers gives you a lot of that ability to give you a nice experience and a nice playground that's kind of safe, and then you can pass it off to the people who will actually deploy and operate it. And I think that's been a really big lesson for me, is that synergy that's got to happen between the two.
And that's really interesting. I hadn't thought of it from that perspective. So that's a very cool takeaway that I think is calling for probably a large percentage of the audience. For people who are considering taking kind of that measured approach of they're going to bite off a small piece of their current approach and containerize that, do you have any words of wisdom on where might a good starting and stopping point be for an early phase adoption of Docker or containers generally?
How do you mean? What?
So instead of saying I'm going to overhaul my entire approach and make it all Docker, where would you say a good place to draw a line of we're just going to attack this component? Is there something like maybe a certain set of variables that typically would be a good place to start, or do you have any direction or recommendations along those
Yeah, but
lines?
maybe what might provide the faster or the better ROI on attacking this small component first versus another one.
Oh, I see. Well, every business is different and has their own, set of things that are specific to them. So it's hard to generalize. But just from my experience in nearly every organization is that there are many, many, many more applications than there are developers, and there are many that were sort of started in maybe as a skunkwork project or something else, and so they kind of have a way to grow, and they may be really important to a small number of people, I think, but they're not a business or mission critical kind of thing. Is taking that kind of sprawl of applications and picking a few of them and say, well, let's redo this in a container architecture. Let's reduce some of the complexity of operating these things. Let's put some of them under monitoring, and operations where maybe they weren't before. Those are the kind of really small wins you can come in and you can have. It's limited scope, but I do think managing the kind of that sprawl is a great way to start, and you can pick them off pretty easily. I think the other another big area is obviously dev test setups. It's like, we've got a 50-minute build time to run all our test suites. Well, let's containerize that and cut it down to 2 or 3 minutes. Those are the other. That's been a real big win for my team. It's just that that use case of being able to not have to go through a full build every time of an environment when you want to change a couple lines of JavaScript. That's a really other great area.
And that's fantastic advice.
Absolutely. Excuse me. Hey, Kyle, Jason, have you guys seen anything else that might have a really strong return on investment like that, like we were talking about? What are some of the other areas, Kyle, that maybe you might be looking at, branching off from the more traditional IT approach of infrastructure and everything and moving over toward a more containerized system?
Yeah, I think so. I'm going to tell you something you probably don't want to hear, which is that you're going to move from a bunch of previous problems that you had and old problems onto a new set of problems that you have.
Don't say it, Kyle. Don't say it.
I'm just being, I want to level with people, and but it's not like people aren't solving these things now and are coming up with solutions, and a lot of it's just that you have to figure out what works for you. And if you weren't using monitoring before, you're going to need it even more when you switch over. But you're going to reap the benefits, but you're still going to need to do all the other things you would do with logging and monitoring and everything else. None of that stuff changes. But the way that you orchestrate and pin this stuff down is going to be different than before. So it's not going to be without other issues. So the thing you have to do when you're figuring this out is to be okay with that and just work through it.
Well, I think it's unreasonable to expect any one solution to be a panacea, but I do think that the prioritization conversation, we've actually hinted around it a few times here. Andrew, you mentioned for each company it's going to be different. It's going to be based on their specific business needs. If you haven't prioritized what exactly you're trying to overcome, you don't know why you're making that move to a new technology. And if you've identified a specific thing that containers are going to achieve better than your current solution, and that's your biggest pain point, then absolutely make that shift. And if you really need some of the key underlying components to your current environment, you need to have a very good reason for shifting to something else, no matter what that other thing is. And unless you've had that prioritization conversation of here is what's the most important thing, and if there's a better solution to that thing out there, we need to make that move because of its importance, then I'm fully behind making that change. But Kyle, your point is strongly made, and I think a lot of times we get excited about new technology and ignore potential pitfalls, or despite the fact that we have a solution that fits our current requirements, we want to do that new cool thing because it's new and it's cool. Well, why wouldn't you want to do the new hotness. But you have to have a compelling reason to do so. So I think dev is a great place where you can test that and get your lessons learned and maybe decide. It's fun, but it doesn't solve the paramount problem that we have, or we discovered that the problem that it does solve is actually more important to us than we thought, and it's worth making the change. But until you've kicked some tires, you don't know that. And it's really important that you don't go in blind to the fact that there is no panacea, and as exciting as containers are, they're not going to solve all of your every need. A very, very well taken point there.
Even if it does fly in the face of a lot of the Docker talk that we see a lot of times, where it is that buzzword where people are ready to go. It is a great point that it is it's going to be a new set of problems, but there are people that are working really hard to solve those problems, and yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, as long as everybody comes together to work on them, it'll get a lot easier. Like we're running forums now that people are collaborating on to figure stuff out at community.getcarina.com, and people can go to the Docker forums as well. The most important thing that I wanted to say for that is that problems will happen. You just have to become comfortable with them. I mean, it's just like any other new technology. It's just such a big shift that it's going to be more pronounced once you run it in production. Running it in dev actually makes it seem like everything is painless. It's not until you're like, oh, okay, you're going to need to think about this a little bit differently with our, production load.
Definitely solid advice there, and we do definitely appreciate your candor on that. It's nice to see that. Well, good. This has been a great conversation. I think there's a lot of good information that's out there, and I know that I'm very excited to see what more people are doing. I guess I think I've run through the end of my questions that I was going to have. Drew, what are we missing here?
The one thing that I'd like to talk about just briefly, and we can take as much or as little time with it as the panel deems fit, but it sounds like O'Reilly was already using Docker well, and a shift into Carina was pretty painless because it's just built to deploy what you've already got. Now, if you have a new approach, if you're thinking about, I want to get some value out of this whole container world, what kinds of things would need to be in place before leveraging Carina if you weren't already a Docker adopter?
So at least to me, like the great thing for Carina is that it gives me a nice way to deploy an app quickly that may just be kind of like a hobby thing. It may just be something where I'm like, I want to put up an API server and see how it works. And then it's not about I have a dev environment or I have production environment or a staging environment. I'm just going to go put it online. Like that's the same thing with if I spin up a cloud server and I want someone to access it. Like this is about just putting up a service. And so it's a lot easier for developers to get in and start going. And like,
yeah. I mean, on the earlier point, I think Drew, you were making is, a bored developer is a very dangerous thing. This is like, oh, go play in this little area. It's super great. You can learn something really quickly. Take this small app and try to deploy it, over here in this, in this really great, safe environment. I think, that's a good advantage. But I think one of the things is we're looking, again, I mentioned this infrastructure that we're kind of looking at Dockerizing. We've got the test suite. I think the persistent storage is an area that I'd like to understand a little better about what the kind of roadmap for Carina looks like to being able to, store things on a file system or a block storage, that kind of stuff. I think to really, anytime you're really talking about a serious application, you've got to have some kind of persistence. And you can have databases and things like that, but I mean it's more at a file level kind of stuff.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
Jason and Kyle, I imagine because we're in a beta and this thing isn't fully baked for full-on production, there's going to be more conversation around that, and I imagine we can get one or both or more on when that conversation has more meat on the bones.
Yeah, so right now, I mean, I'll answer it. I said it in our weekly news post last week. We just launched Docker 1.9. So when you launch clusters, you get Docker 1.9, which Docker 1.9 now has a volume support, and that works across Swarm with the right overlay networking setup and everything else. We do not yet support the volumes, nor do we support the networks. The networks we're working on now. Volumes we still have to do some thinking about to make sure that it works right, because we wouldn't want to deploy something that we'd have to take away later. We have to think through this one. But I certainly want the ability to get the volumes. I mean, especially if I could link up to Cloud Block Storage. Those are all things I'd want to have, but we're not there yet. So.
Well, how does the process work then? As people are involved in the beta and are using the tools, how does the conversation grow around what Carina evolves into? How can our customers and the users of Carina have their voice heard and be a part of maturing our product?
So the two main ways are a GitHub repo that's at github.com/getcarina/feedback, and then the other one is community.getcarina.com.
Great.
I think on top of those two methods, which Kyle mentioned and are very user-friendly to kind of get in there and interact with other users of Carina, as well as Kyle and the rest of the team, we this week have been conducting phone interviews with users. So we selected about 50 or so, and we're literally calling them. I think Simon Ukesh has been on the phone pretty much 24 hours a day, calling people all around the world, and we'll be following up sort of that initial sample size with all the users via a little bit more quantitative kind of survey to get feedback. And what we want to gain from all the feedback we get, whether it's through GitHub, through the community, through these phone and email surveys, is feedback just like Andrew mentioned, right? We want to know exactly what the users want, and that's why we're going to have Carina in an extended beta, because we want to gain that operational experience and expertise, hear from customers like Andrew, what do you guys need? And that will help us shape the future roadmap for future offerings around Carina.
There we go. Sorry, I missed the mute there. Thanks. No, that's good. I love to see that this is we're really focusing on the beta aspect of this, where, I mean, it is absolutely a product that's functioning well right now, but we really want that user input. And I know that, Jason, you were with us in San Francisco last week at FutureStack, talking with those users there at that New Relic conference about their interest in Carina and in Docker specifically. We've been, like you mentioned, on the phone with everybody, so it's very much an active community where we're really trying to find out more about it, and really trying to focus on more and more use cases. In fact, as we were talking here, Don Schenk, one of Kyle's colleagues there as well, just published something about how to get up and running with a .NET application on Carina. So that's great to see that there. It's all over. It's not just for Linux users anymore. It's for even the Windows developers. So good to see that there. Well, this has been a really good conversation. Lots of interesting stuff. I just want to thank Kyle, Jason, and Andrew for taking the time to spend with us here. You guys have provided some really good insight into how you're using Docker. Andrew, I'm really excited to see more of what O'Reilly can do. It's really interesting to see how this has changed that cycle of change the cycle of learning, right? It's really shortened the time to actually getting your hands dirty and learning, and that's really what it's all about, especially in technology. Anytime that I've studied online, being able to go in and actually do something and not spend the first 45 minutes setting something up is great. What do you think has been the do you see any feedback directly from your users about the ability to use specifically these Jupyter notebooks in the lessons?
Oh, definitely. I mean, people vote with their time. I mean, we see the response in the metrics. Where an article that just might be, oh, here's a description of Python.
Mhm.
Somebody might spend 2 minutes. When you have a Jupyter interaction and people can use it and learn it, people spend 15 minutes. I mean, and that's in the web world, that's really substantial. Like
Yeah.
on some of our sites, you might have half a second somebody hits on and goes. So I think that kind of engagement and being able to really tie it to the metrics, specifically the business metrics that O'Reilly looks at. And again, I'm really aware that we're, a media company has a different interest than an insurance company or whatever, but for the metrics that we look at, it's really made a very significant improvement in terms of what we see people learning and the way that people respond. And then also, the other piece is really is talent. Is authors and people who understand these technologies. They have a lot of options for going out and reaching an audience and being able to show them, hey, these are the kinds of things that you can create. They are, using technology that is really cutting edge. They look beautiful. They're a great experience. There's a team that can help you, and that's a really powerful message to be able to go to people with and say, this is why, this is why O'Reilly continues to be a really, great media company and learning company. Not just, whether you're doing a book or a video or whatever you're doing. We're able to help you reach things in a way that's going to be super effective.
Well, absolutely. We thank you for the media, for the books, the videos, and the interactive components of it. Thank you. I know I've learned quite a bit from O'Reilly books myself, and so thank you for that, and thank you for being one of our customers. We really appreciate it.
Oh, no,
And
thank you.
absolutely, we're happy to. So, I guess we'll end it on that and just say thank you for joining us today. Thank you for watching our show, and really glad to have all of our viewers that are watching right now live in real time, and everybody else that's going to watch it or listen to the audio podcast down the road. So. If you're listening to the audio podcast, hey, how's the future going? So good to see you guys in the future there. We do this every week. We're going to actually
next week.
Not next week. It's Thanksgiving.
I'll be
That's
tucking
right.
into pie
Yeah.
out this time.
Exactly. Yeah, it'll be just about turkey nap time. So we'll be hitting that up pretty hard next week. But we'll be back the week after that, and just about every week after that as well. So check us out. You can check out the live show is always going to be at live.ohpodcast.com.
Mm-hmm.
ohpodcast.com will have all of the podcast versions of it, and then check us out on the Rackspace blog for recaps with more information in them. So again, Andrew, Jason, and Kyle, thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll see everybody next week. Take it easy.
Bye, guys.
Yeah, thanks, guys.